Hi, my name's Bob Stewart. My talk today is going to be about Francis Benjamin Johnston, who was a very successful photographer around the turn of the 19th century, roughly from 1890 to 1920. I am principal of historical technologies, and I work as a field investigator, delineator, consulting industrial archaeologist, and photographer. I do this work under contract to other cultural resource firms and for preservation agencies. I specialize in almost anything, but primarily in railroads, military, government, aerospace projects, and 20th century manufacturing technology. Francis Benjamin Johnston was a very successful woman photographer during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. She was born in 1864 and died in 1952. She was not a typical Victorian woman, although the photograph on the right would make it seem so. If you take a look at the photo on the right, she's doing things that were no-no in that period, smoking a cigarette with a beer stein in her left hand and showing an ankle under that voluminous skirt. She was a bit of a cut-up, but extremely professional in her chosen field of photography. Now, the period restricted many women to specific gender roles, generally Kinder, Kirken, and Kuchen. These are historic woodcuts, actually zinc engravings from magazines of the period showing what would be a typical housewife and squalling baby, ironing, cleaning up. But there were many women at the time that began to get into office work. Over here on the left, we have a woman running a Hollerith machine, which was used in the 1890s census. So they could not have done the census without this machine. They figured it was, Congress at that time figured that it would take 11 or 12 years to collate all of the data that was coming in from the census takers. And Hollerith invented this machine. They got it done in about 2 years. And this machine went on to IBM eventually and was the punch card system was used until 1976. Also, in 1886, Bell had invented the dictaphone, and this is a later model of it, in which used a wax cylinder. And it's rather interesting, some of the apparatus that was used to achieve a constant speed on the cylinder. But here we are here with a photographer. Presumably it's Frances Johnson. She was one of the most successful pioneering women photographers. She was originally trained as an artist at the Académie Julian in Paris, and soon discovered or decided that photography was a more accurate medium than painting. And she went and achieved a relationship with Thomas Smiley, who was curator of the photography at the Smithsonian, and learned about the photo business. By 1890, she was known as the photographer of the American court. And I'm sure you recognize the gentleman on the left, Mark Twain. And in the middle, of course, we have Alice Roosevelt. She was a great friend of Roosevelt and then traveled in political circles. She was a distant relation of Grover Cleveland, and actually she traced her lineage back to Pocahontas. I don't know how true that was, but that was her claim to fame. Alice Roosevelt was a very difficult child, and Theodore was quoted as saying, "I can either run the country or I can attend to Alice, but I cannot possibly do both." But we're going to get to the industrial and the worker photos of that Francis Benjamin Johnston took. Up here we have a photo of metal workers. This was later made into a zinc plate and used in newspaper and magazine reproductions, as was this photo over here on the right, far right. There's a miner. Was taken in 1903 in the Mesabi Range, an iron miner. A young lady, a young woman in Lynn, Massachusetts in 1895 in a shoe factory. This was another photo that was turned into a zinc plate and used in magazines. And then down here we have a group of women that worked in a cigar box factory in 1910. Now, the problem with a lot of Francis Benjamin Johnston's photos is she wasn't much of a caption writer. She might put a date on the back of the photo, but to get the historical background on these is you have to look in other sources. You won't find them on, generally you won't find them on the photographs themselves. There's another woman who was preparing punch programming strip for a Jacquard Loom. So these are the jobs that women were doing in that turn of the century period. Of course, the big thing going on then was the exploitation of rich deposits of iron ore in the Mesabi Range. This made American steel a major heavy industry. The mines were producing 13 million tons of ore a year, 1/6 of the world's supply. The steam shovels could roll 50 tons of ore in a car in 3 minutes and load a 10-car train in 30 minutes. And the problem there was not digging the ore out, but in scheduling the trains fast enough to transport it out of the mining area. Johnson also photographed a dock worker. Much of the ore was shipped out on lake steamers. She photographed a dock worker, again, no name, and the caption was achieved from a historical record rather than anything on that photograph. Of course, here's a picture of an ore carrier in Duluth in 1891. She also got an assignment from Demarest Family Magazine to photograph workers in a coal mine. Had to use magnesium flash powder for a light source in a very dark atmosphere of fire damp, smoke, coal dust, and with a nod to the old comedian Fred Allen, one could say her success had the life expectancy of a small boy who was about to look in a gas tank with a lighted match. But the best of this series was shot in the breakers, where young boys handpicked slate pieces from the coal. She also got quite friendly with the workers, visited their homes, and was accepted in the community during this assignment. Then we get to the main topic here, and that is Dewey and Francis Benjamin Johnston. During my documentation of the USS Olympus for here, I came across a reference to her photos of the vessel. And said, what is a woman in 1899 doing on a warship? Well, after the Spanish-American War was over. It only lasted about 4 months. The country was very interested in Dewey and the ship. And so several photographers were managed to get aboard to take pictures of the crew and Dewey. Francis Benjamin Johnson, through her connection with Teddy Roosevelt, took her calling card and managed to call on the president. President wrote on her calling card, "My dear Admiral Dewey, Miss Johnson is a lady in whom I personally know. I can vouch for, she does good work, and any promise she makes, she will keep." And I actually picked this card up. It is at the Naval Museum at the Washington Navy Yard. And of course, in a gloved hand, I looked at that. I was holding the same calling card that got her permission to get the run of the ship. She took 150 photographs during this assignment. Here's a picture of the Olympia. And it was commissioned on February 5th, 1895. It's a protected cruiser of 5,870 tons, length of 344 feet, and a beam of 53 feet. She had a crew of 34 officers and 440 enlisted ratings. 6 boilers provided 17,313 horsepower through twin-screw triple expansion engines to drive the ship. When I say protected cruiser, that is a very interesting design in that the decks were heavily armored, and then below the deck was coal bunkers, and on the sides of the vessel it was a double hull, which originally was filled with corn cobs. The idea being that if the outer hull was holed, the corn cobs would absorb water and slow sinking. It was a terrible idea. The corn cobs soon rotted, and the ship was sort of a floating garbage can until they removed the corn cobs and replaced them with coal bunkers. There's more of that in the Hare report, if anyone is interested. Johnson made a hit with Dewey and the crew. She became sort of a ship's mascot and completed an assignment record. Her rating was snapshots, and she achieved a 5 or top score in everything from seamanship to marksmanship, except for one area, and that was she got a 4.9 in sobriety. Word was that she could hold her liquor and drink any man under the table. Now, by August 5th, in 1899, her USA agent was anxiously waiting her negatives. There were other photographers aboard, and she entrusted J.C. Hemmett to take her work to New York while she continued recording sailors' activities. Hemmett did so, but he delayed releasing Johnson's work while submitting his own, thus underhandedly scooping her. And then she took a number of pictures of the crew members and their activities on the vessel. The sailor in the center was likely a sideboy. A sideboy is a member of an even-numbered group of sailors posted in 2 rows at the quarterdeck when a visiting dignitary boards or leaves the ship. Historically, it was to help him aboard in a ceremony known as tending the side. Presently, sideboys are only used for ceremonial purposes. Shorter members of the crew were preferred if available. One of my jobs was at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, where they had the Admiral had a full complement of sideboys, and I doubt if any of them were more than 5 feet tall. There's a nicely posed photograph of an unidentified engineering officer, Johnson's traveling companion or chaperone, and Olympia's helmsman. And over here we have the ship's bugler. Now, although the cutlass remained an official weapon in the United States Navy until 1949, it was seldom used in training after the early 1930s. However, during the Korean War, a Marine non-com killed an enemy with a cutlass. So maybe this training was actually useful after all. The Navy encouraged a lot of physical exercise to keep the crew in shape, and they encouraged dancing as a suggested method of exercise. On the right here, we have a sailor getting a tattoo. There's a meaning to the tattoo system. A single anchor on the left arm would indicate he had crossed the Atlantic, and other items would be dolphins, hula girls, stars, cannon turtles. They all had specific meanings. Olympia was fueled by coal. Probably the worst job on the ship was replenishing coal because it had to be hauled from the collier in bags, burlap bags, to the bunkers on the Olympia. And it was a dusty, dirty job. And of course, laundry facilities were very limited aboard ship, as you can see. But it took a lot of work to get the coal dust out of the clothing and off the ship. Sleeping quarters on the right were in the same area as the crew's mess. The tables were taken down, and the same hooks that held the tables up were also used to hold the hammocks. There were always a couple of crew members who could do tasks like uniform repairs, or in some cases tailor a whole new uniform. Other tasks, such as hair cutting, could be performed for shipmates for a small fee. The tailor on a ship was called a sheeny. Again, I don't know what the original context of the word was, but that was what it was. Of course, knot work was essential, even on a steel ship. Of course, in the old wooden ship days, it was vital to the performance of the ship. But knowledge of knots, ropes, splicing, making eyes, it was essential, and it was part of a sailor's training, and a lot of sailors continued to practice during their spare time. Hats were very common on at least they were tolerated aboard ship. They had parrots over here, and a kitten were typical, and mice were taken as pets. And of course, the most famous of all was Admiral Dewey's Chow Bob, who was supposed to be one of the best treated crew members on the vessel. Gunnery. This again, Johnson took pictures below deck using flash powder. Not so much a problem here. This is in a torpedo room. The torpedo room also served as Johnston's dark room. And again, this is a flash taken with flash powder in a torpedo room. And I must say that the woman had guts. The Olympia was considered a small cruiser with big battleship guns. It had 4 8-inch guns and 35 caliber guns and twin gun turrets, among other armaments. There were 3 engineering officers in the companionway to the engine room. She never did get down in the engine room, or at least I never found any photographs in the collection of the engines. I've seen the engines myself, but I haven't. She never photographs them. And here on the right we have Olympia's helmsman, who maneuvered Olympia during the Battle of Manila. And the final photograph I have is, I think I call it the spirit of the USS Olympia. She took this of an enlisted rating, and it so typifies the attitude of the period. America's imperial age, I would call it. There was a period when we took the Philippines and Hawaii, and this fella here looks like he could handle almost anything at all. So the Johnson collection to the Library of Congress is a very valuable resource. It's thousands of pictures. She gave her collection to the country, and so there are no copyright issues on it. While it lacks captions, they can be supplied from other historical sources. Her eye for detail adds insight to the written record of the period. And anyone that's interested in this can download HAIR document PA 128 for more information on Olympia's history and the ship's construction. So we're ready for any questions at this point. Thank you very much.